It has been a mixed season across Europe for reigning league champions. Manchester City, Bayern Munich and Inter Milan once again topped the Premier League, Bundesliga and Serie A tables respectively at the time of recording. Meanwhile, Atletico Madrid are 4th in La Liga and Lille are actually in the bottom half of the Ligue 1 table. But do not despair, any Lille fans who might be watching, since your title defence is far from the worst within the European game. No, that crown would have to go to Legia Warsaw. Despite having won 7 of the last 9 Polish Ekstraklasa League titles, including last season's title by a margin of 5 points, the most successful club in Polish football is currently bottom of the division, having picked up a measly 12 points from 16 games, rapidly approaching the midway stage of the season. It is a shocking situation that few had anticipated, following an ambitious summer transfer window, which saw Legia come into this season as title favourites once again. But as things stand, the club's status as Poland's only top-flight team not to have tasted relegation since the Warsaw Uprising and the end of World War II is under severe threat. What's more, pinpointing the exact cause of Legia's demise is not all that easily done. You might think that for a team to fall from being the dominant force within the league for a decade to the foot of the league table, there would be some kind of smoking gun. A very obvious explanation for all of their troubles. Throughout this series, looking at teams who have suffered or are currently suffering very dramatic falls from grace, there is typically some kind of financial meltdown, a mass exodus of players, or the person bankrolling the club has gone on the run from the police on charges of drug trafficking or of selling arms to the North Koreans. But there are no mafia bosses on the run at Legia, there have been no fire sales, no flights to North Korea, no recent match-fixing scandals, and no fake sheikhs claiming to represent Bahrain's House of Khalifa whilst actually operating out of their auntie's basement in Stratford-upon-Avon. There is just a football team who only lost 4 games all season last season, but have already lost 12 times in the league this season, despite having beaten both Leicester City and CSKA Moscow in the Europa League. Put bluntly, it's all a little bit strange. And following a series of requests from confused football fans who had taken note of Legia's plight, I thought I'd do some digging and try to get to the bottom of it. So, this Christmas season, sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the 7th largest capital city in Europe, to a city that was decimated during World War II as 6 million Poles perished, which is now home to a booming reconstructed old town, was the birthplace of Marie Curie, and is also home to a football club that has dominated the city's footballing landscape, developing a reputation for success, fanaticism, and often violence. Over the summer, Legia Warsaw had a net spend of effectively nothing. 10 new players were brought in, 4 of whom commanded transfer fees, but their total cost of £2.75 million was almost entirely offset by the single sale of Josip Juranovic to Celtic. Juranovic was Legia's most notable summer departure, the Croatian international having been a star man in the Polish capital last season in his debut campaign after arriving from Hajduk Split. Nonetheless, his sale didn't come as a crushing blow. Juranovic's form across his single season in Warsaw had attracted plenty of interest, and most Legia fans expected to see him go, even if they were a little bit underwhelmed by his £2.7 million transfer fee. Fellow first-team regular Pavel Shoak, who scored 5 goals and made 6 assists from the right wing last season, also departed, this time on a free transfer. Though again, his farewell came as little surprise. It had been fairly widely reported during the second half of last season that Zizek was disappointed with the contract offer that he had received from Legia, and he ended up joining Union Berlin in the Bundesliga on a Bosman. Admittedly, there was some concern about how insulted Zizek was said to have been by Legia's contract offer to him, leading to rumours of a lack of investment, but at the same time, Zizek had played abroad before. Bundesliga teams will always be able to outbid Polish teams, and most Legia fans know the drill by now. As the former employers of Wojciech Szczesny, Łukasz Fabianski, Kamil Grosicki and Robert Lewandowski, to name just a few of their former youth team or first team players, Legia are well aware of the fact that they will not always be able to keep hold of their star performers, and that player development and player sales are crucial to the club's financial sustainability. What's more, as I said in the introduction, Legia didn't even sit on that cash over the summer, it was fully reinvested. The almost £1.2 million that Legia spent on Lirim Castrati made him the club's second most expensive signing of all time, and several of Legia's signings have experience playing in European competitions. You see, for a club like Legia Warsaw, and by that I mean just about every top-end team from a European nation that isn't among the continent's top 5 leagues, Europe carries a special weight of importance. Not only does it carry greater prestige for players, managers, owners and directors than almost anything that they can do at home, it also provides unparalleled financial opportunities. Legia received €15 million for just reaching the group stage of the Champions League in the 2016-17 season, before they had even played any games. That is more than double the record amount that they received across the entire 2020-21 Ekstraklasa season, despite winning the league title. Europa League group stage qualification is worth a little over €3.6 million, but a single win is worth a further €630,000, roughly 10% of what Legia make across an entire domestic title-winning campaign. Those are just the guaranteed numbers when, in reality, the financial incentive is far greater than that. If Legia field an 18-year-old against Napoli, who runs the midfield, scores a goal, or shows a few nice touches out on the left or right flanks, they will probably be able to times his valuation by 10 overnight. A single starring role in a Europa League tie for a player is probably worth more to Legia than a 25-goal season in the Ekstraklasa. As with a number of teams then, and particularly those outside of the Big 5 leagues, Legia put huge emphasis on getting results in Europe. They do this every season, and given the fact that Polish teams tend to enter European competitions at the first qualifying round, that means that they have to play 6 or even 8 games just to qualify for the group stage of a competition, followed by a further 6 games if they manage to qualify successfully. So Legia begin most seasons with some fairly intense fixture congestion. And since they tend to prioritise their European games over their domestic campaign, they are no strangers to making slow starts to the season. Last season, for instance, Legia lost 2 of their first 4 league games before losing just 2 of their next 26 games over the course of the rest of the season, having been knocked out of the Europa League qualifying by Karabakh from Azerbaijan. So when Legia made a stuttering start to this season, no one was that surprised, especially given the fact that they were doing exceptionally well in Europe. Following that disappointment in Europe last season, Legia beat Bodo Glimt, both home and away in Champions League qualifying this season, who are the best Norwegian team that we've seen in Europe for a very long time, and who beat Roma 6-1 after dropping into the Conference League. They defeated Estonian champions Flora, again winning both legs, and they only lost 2-1 on aggregate against Dinamo Zagreb in the last Champions League qualifying round, which saw them drop into the Europa League playoffs. There, Legia were handed a horrible tie against Slavia Prague, who beat Leicester City, Rangers, and Bayer Leverkusen last season, and have recently drawn against the likes of Arsenal and FC Barcelona. But Legia won 4-3 on aggregate to reach the Europa League group stage. Things would not get any easier there, as they were put in arguably the tournament's group of death, alongside Napoli, Leicester City, and Spartak Moscow. Legia won their first 2 games against both Leicester and Spartak, before 4 defeats brought their valiant Europa League campaign to an end, with almost any neutral observer having to concede that, in a slightly easier group, they would most likely have progressed, and would almost certainly have at least qualified for the Conference League via a 3rd place finish. However, whilst Legia had been bravely battling away in the Europa League, their slow start to the league campaign was becoming a little bit more than just a slow start. Stuttering starts might have been forgivable in the midst of any early season battle to qualify for European competition, but this was starting to go on for a little too long. 5 days before Legia beat Leicester 1-0, they lost what would be the first in a run of 7 straight defeats, the club's longest losing streak in 85 years. The contrast between Legia's continental and domestic form, combined with their habit of making a slow start to the league campaign, meant that it took a little bit of time for this season to be deemed as a proper crisis, worthy of provoking an angry response from Legia's famously, or infamously shall we say, fanatical supporters. But you can rest assured that has arrived now. What's more, Legia weren't, and indeed still aren't, playing that badly, with a heavy influence on the word that there. There can be no doubt that they look a shadow of the team that won the league title last season, but it's not as if they are being played off the park every week. They lead the division in terms of possession and passing accuracy, and they are still getting plenty of crosses into the box, and they're even 5th in the league when it comes to shots per game. And yet, they are the second lowest scorers in the division and have shipped 27 goals in only 16 games at the time of this recording. You could argue that it is cause for some optimism since Legia aren't a total wreck during games, they're just not getting good results. But by the same token, they are a team who are used to winning games and winning league titles even when they are not at their best. So, to be losing games when they're not even at their worst is cause for more than a little concern. At this point, I must address the elephant in the room, which is Legia's injury crisis. Just a few weeks ago, Legia had at least 7 of what you would call their strongest starting 11 sidelined. There are a couple of reasons for this, one of them just being bad luck, but there is also the fact that during their early season fixture congestion, when Legia would typically rotate players and put out their strongest team in Europe, thus sometimes dropping points in the league, manager Czeslaw Michniewicz decided this season to basically try and start an unchanged team even when they were playing twice, sometimes 3 times during the space of a week. Not only did they do worse than ever in the league, despite still picking their strongest team, it meant their strongest 11 rapidly began to have fitness problems and fatigue before they started dropping like flies. To give you some idea of just how many games Legia have played this season, Russian centre-forward Mahir Emreli, who joined Legia from Krabi in the summer, has already played 33 games this season. That was said to be one of the reasons why Czeslaw Michniewicz was sacked on October 25th, along with Legia's terrible league form of course, with disputes between him and the club's chairman, who is also their owner. Nothing improved under interim boss Marek Gołębiewski though. In fact, you could argue that things only got worse. And the same could be said for new permanent boss Aleksander Vukovic's honeymoon period, which has been the honeymoon of a couple that any rational observer would conclude is in great danger of another early divorce. Among Legia's most pressing injury concerns has been the sidelining of veteran goalkeeper Artur Boruc. Brought back to Legia in 2020, where he spent 6 years roughly 2 decades ago, Boruc is 41 years old now, and there were concerns among Legia fans about his creaking bones and lack of agility coming into this season. However, an injury to the former Celtic and Southampton man has left supporters yearning for the return of his steady, if not lightning-quick pair of hands. Boruc's replacement whilst out injured has been Cezary Miszta, who was 19 when this season started, but has since turned 20. Miszta is a Poland under-21 international, and there is still hope that he will become a Legia number 1 in time, but goalkeepers develop at different rates to outfield players, and right now, handed a baptism of fire in a struggling Legia side, he has struggled more than most. There is simply no more important position on the pitch, and Legia's uncertainty between the sticks has been at the heart of their early season crisis. I mentioned a moment ago that Legia's notoriously mischievous supporters, to put it in the nicest possible way, have started to let their feelings about the team's results be known in recent weeks, and they have done so in typical Legia fashion. Just last week, a group of supporters broke onto the Legia team bus where they decided to attack 2 or 3 of the club's players. It is worth noting that Legia's bus, which was en route to the club's training ground following a defeat away at Wisła Płock, was under a police escort at the time. Supporters prevented the team from entering the training ground and, whilst the bus was stationary, fans gained access. According to reports, training was cancelled the following day, 2 players were injured, and 1 had to miss training for a number of days. Now, far be it from me to question the judgment of violent Legia Warsaw hooligans, but it strikes me as being rather counterintuitive if you are struggling down at the bottom of the league table and have a massive injury crisis to prevent your team from being able to train and to injure another player. There is probably some part of that master plan that has gone straight over my head. When any company, organisation or institution goes through a particularly difficult time, it is only natural, and indeed quite reasonable, that people should look to the top. And Legia owner Dariusz Mioduski certainly isn't blameless in this whole dilemma. Mioduski is a 57-year-old man who hails from the Polish town of Chełmno, which is closer to the cities of Poznan and Gdansk than it is to Warsaw. situated around 3.5 hours away from the Polish capital. Mioduski makes no claim to be a passionate, lifelong Legia Warsaw supporter. Even his own LinkedIn page describes him as being a, quote, die-hard Real Madrid fan. Mioduski's background is in law and finance. He studied law at Harvard Law School before spending a number of years working for law firms in the United States. After returning to Poland, Mioduski became a partner at the international law firm CMS before being appointed as CEO of one of Poland's largest private investment companies in 2007. Mioduski spent 6 years in that job before stepping down in 2013 and founding his own investment firm, named Radvan Investments. It was at that time, in 2013, when Mioduski clearly began to take an interest in passion projects that he acquired a controlling interest in Legia Warsaw. If one looks at Legia's success since Mioduski acquired the club, you could be forgiven for thinking that he had either invested an awful lot of his own personal wealth into the club, or was an absolute genius when it came to running a club. As far as many football fans in Poland are concerned though, neither is really the case. Wisła Kraków had been the dominant force in Polish football up until shortly before Mioduski bought Legia, when they hit the self-destruct button, heralding wealthy owner Boguslav Kupial's demise and the takeover of the club by the Wisła Sharks, who are basically just a set of hooligans. Those of you who have watched my documentary about Wisła will be well aware of that hijacking, and the idea that Legia's success is as much to do with the self-sabotage of other clubs as it is to do with their own brilliance is a fairly commonly held one in Poland. What's more, the disparity in income that is achieved by teams regularly competing in Europe now, as I outlined earlier on, leads to a huge wealth gap between teams that makes it difficult for those outside of that top bracket to compete. Mioduski has long been criticised for exercising too much control over the day-to-day management of the club, making poor recruitment decisions and of being too rash at times. Mioduski is not only Legia's owner, he is also their chairman, a dual role that has become increasingly rare within the modern game for obvious reasons. Mioduski is most likely a very smart guy, in at least one sense of the term, having graduated from Harvard Law School and succeeded in business. But prior to buying Legia, he had no direct involvement in football. Being a great lawyer or a great CEO is very different to being a great operator within the world of football. And at Legia, Mioduski is learning on the job, and not learning very well, some might suggest. In spite of all their success, Legia have had 13 different managers during Mioduski's 8 years at the club, including 4 since 2020 alone. He has often been accused of hiring managers without the necessary credentials on a whim, dictating numerous aspects of how they do their job, including who the team signs, and then of scapegoating the club's head coach when things go wrong. It is a cycle which has become increasingly common at Legia, and perhaps now it is finally catching up with them. Though some Legia fans have been all too happy to be labelled, or to label themselves, as the Polish Bayern Munich, Legia never really had the kind of institutional dominance and established presence that Bayern have cemented over generations. For all of their success, Legia have very rarely won away with the league title. Typically, they have won it by only 1, 2 or 3 points, a far cry from Bayern's routine steamrolling of the Bundesliga. Mioduski's most recent managerial casualties have been Czesław Michniewicz and Marek Gojembewski. Neither were particularly popular among Legia fans, and neither have received a great deal of sympathy following their dismissals. Most felt Michniewicz should never have been appointed, and that he was tactically one-dimensional, failed to integrate the team's new signings into the squad, and that his lack of rotation at least part facilitated the club's damaging injury crisis. By the end, despite his impressive European results, it was pretty clear that Michniewicz had lost his dressing room. Gojembewski, who replaced him, previously served as Legia's reserve team boss and had worked alongside Michniewicz. He was basically only appointed because Mioduski had failed to negotiate terms with all of the managers that he actually wanted at the club, and Gojembewski was just really a continuity candidate. And by that I mean he continued to play Michniewicz's one-dimensional tactics, they continued not to work, and Legia continued to lose games. Whilst the stats show that Legia are still playing somewhat competent football and are still creating chances, their confidence has been shot to pieces. As I have previously said on this channel, Mohamed Diame once told me that 60% of football is confidence, 40% is ability. And whilst I'm not sure that is an exact science or that an exact figure could ever actually be arrived at, it is certainly true that momentum, morale, and, for want of a more wretched phrase, the feel-good factor within a squad all play a huge role in both the team's performances and results. There's another criticism of Legia's players that has been made, and particularly of their new summer arrivals, that perhaps they do not have the club's domestic success held all that closely to their hearts. European accomplishments aren't just huge to Legia, they are also huge to the club's players. The Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League are like three massive shop windows that you can put yourself in, advertising your talents to the continent's great and good. Impress, and you might just land yourself a life-changing contract. Whereas, if you are absolutely bang at it, turning in 7 and 8 out of 10 every week in the Ekstraklasa with unparalleled consistency, there is still every chance that few people will take note, unless you start doing something seriously special. The fact that Legia performed so admirably in Europe this season, and so dreadfully domestically, while still having the same coaches and tactics in both competitions, certainly lends some weight to the theory that certain Legia players are treating the club as a stepping stone. And that's fine. After all, you could argue that every club in the world, bar maybe 6 or 7 teams, are a stepping stone if you're good enough. But that doesn't excuse switching off in the league, and the extent to which Legia have switched off in the league really is mind-boggling. It's worth noting that rival fans are absolutely revelling in Legia's misery. Rightly or wrongly, Legia fans have a reputation in Poland for being arrogant, as well as the not insignificant number of violent supporters, hooligans, and thugs who are associated with the club, and who are often considered to be bringing the Polish game into disrepute and doing untold damage to the league's reputation. It should be said that Legia are far from the only Polish team with trouble-causing supporters. Anyone who watched my Wisla video will know that all too well. But they are the most synonymous of any with those elements, and further violence when the team faced Leicester City in the Europa League hardly helped to ease that reputation. Legia were founded in 1916 during the First World War on the Eastern Front as the Polish military's football club. And ever since, the club has been associated with violence and nationalism, which has not infrequently spilt over into the realms of xenophobia and racism. There are a number of Legia fans, and Polish football fans in general, to whom football certainly seems to be a secondary interest. They go to games, first and foremost, to fight, and what happens on the pitch is largely an afterthought. These groups of people who, it must be said, are a minority, but not an insignificant one, taking chunks only out of each other might not seem like all that much of a problem. But naturally, innocent bystanders are not always safe, and their presence no doubt deters genuine football fans who don't want to become embroiled in any kind of violence from attending games. As we saw in England when the vast majority of football hooliganism was ridded from the game, interest in the sport increased, attendances increased, and those crowds became much more diverse, with women and children in particular starting to flock to grounds in their numbers. So Legia Warsaw's demise is not a tale of spontaneous combustion that you're used to hearing about on this channel. There is no singular issue, typically relating to money, criminality, or just some total loon, that is plaguing the club. But rather, it has been a cocktail of issues. A temperamental owner, a managerial merry-go-round, unsettled signings with questionable motives, an injury crisis, a 20-year-old keeper whose confidence is shot to pieces, a couple of key players departing, and a sense throughout the Polish game that Legia are no longer a team to be feared. It must be said that, unlike some people, I highly doubt that Legia Warsaw will actually be relegated this season, or even that they will come close. They no longer have any European distractions, players will come back from injuries, and the team is now managed by Aleksander Vukovic, who Dariusz Miduski has already sacked once, but who also did a decent job first time around. Therefore, I would imagine that Legia will pick up at least 2 or 3 wins over the festive period, quite possibly even 1 or 2 before this video comes out, depending on when I manage to get it scheduled. They will not win the league though, and qualifying for Europe would take an absolutely monumental effort and a practically flawless second half of the season, which I should think is about as unlikely as them actually going down. Nonetheless, whatever happens this season, Legia Warsaw up to this point have been a pretty fascinating disaster class that was worthy of further inspection, and I hope you found this video even half as enlightening to watch as I found it to research. I am going to be visiting Poland for the first time in 2022, if COVID will allow it, so naturally I've started to follow the Polish game a little bit closer than I previously had, and I, like many of you I'm sure, have been curious about Legia's short-term demise at the very least. If you did enjoy today's video, hit the like button, that would be much appreciated. Leave a comment if you've anything to say, interesting or not, and make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.